Welcome to the Jenny Beth Show.
Anti-Semitism in America is real and it is rising. For Congressman Randy Fine, he has experienced this real rising problem personally, and he's not staying silent. Last week, I had the privilege of sitting down to interview Congressman Fine. He represents Florida's 6th Congressional District. As you watch this episode as it airs, I'm on my way to Alaska to work to pass the Save America Act, but I was able to get this interview recorded so that I can be with you still today. Congressman Fine is a Harvard graduate, a former Florida state legislator, and one of the most outspoken voices in the country on anti-Semitism and the safety of the Jewish community. He has authored landmark anti-boycott legislation. He led the response in Florida to campus anti-Semitism, and he chaired the Florida House Commerce Committee. He's part of the House Freedom Caucus, and he's a huge conservative. Congressman Randy Fine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So you are a fairly newly elected member of Congress. You're in the House Freedom Caucus. You are Jewish, and you are you're used to legislating, and you used to be in the Florida legislature, correct? Can you give just a little bit of a bio background for people who may not be familiar with you yet?
Sure. So I'm from Florida, third generation Floridian. Spent my career as an entrepreneur. Started my first business when I was 19. Worked hard until I was 40. Retired at 40, and realized I had a lot of gas left in the tank. And frankly, my wife told me either I was going to find something else to do or she was going to find somewhere else to live. And so I ended up a member of the Florida legislature, very focused on education and helping make Florida the best state in the country. Served in the Florida House for 8 years. Got elected to the Florida Senate in November of 2024 when President Trump won. Thought I would be a Florida state senator, but 2 weeks after the election, President Trump asked me to run for Congress. So I was one of the first people elected in a special election. I got elected to Congress last April 1st. So I've been in Congress just over a year. An honor to be here, and I am the newest member of the Freedom Caucus, and I'm actually the first ever Jewish member of the Freedom Caucus as well. So up here, excited to fight for the people of the 6th Congressional District. My district does not represent Orlando, and it doesn't represent Jacksonville, but it represents just about everything in between.
So that would include the Space Coast, correct?
I don't have the Space Coast, but my district runs from Daytona Beach all the way up to the outskirts of St. Augustine, and then all the way to the west, it touches parts of I-75. It's a big chunk of land in the middle of the state in between Orlando and Jacksonville.
Okay. All right. Very good. That makes visually, I understand exactly where that is. Okay. And you are the first Jewish member of the House Freedom Caucus. In Florida, I believe that you passed some legislation related to anti-Semitism and hate speech. Is that correct?
Never really anything relating to hate speech, because speech is allowed. You're allowed to say stupid things, but I did do things relating to behavior. I'll talk about a few of them. Number one, look, I was focused on one of my focuses. I did other things. I passed the bill, for example, to end the mutilation of children in Florida, to stop taking kids to drag queen shows. I took on Disney, lots of other legislation. But one of the things that I did was I focused on making Florida the safest place in America to be Jewish. And so we did a number of things. One of the things we did is we passed a bill that defined anti-Semitism and then said anti-Semitism had to be treated the same way in our education system as racism. So, for example, if you go to a university in this country and you use the N-word, it takes about 10 seconds for you to be expelled and invited to get an education somewhere else. And that's how it should be. But somehow when it came to Jews, everyone said, well, free speech, free speech, free speech. I said, look, I'm not going to tell you how to police speech. I'm just going to tell you you can't discriminate and how you deal with discrimination. So if you're going to kick out a kid who uses the N-word, then you're going to kick out a kid who discriminates against Jews. So we passed that bill. But we also did things that took on conduct and behavior. So, for example, we had anti-Semites that were throwing anti-Semitic flyers into people's yards, saying the most horrific stuff. Well, you have the right to create flyers that say horrific things, but you don't have the right to litter. And so we passed a bill that said if you litter, and the content of that is hateful, then you're going to go to prison for 5 years. If you want to stand on a street corner and hand out those flyers, good luck to you. You might get punched in the face, but you can do it. But you can't litter in people's yards, and that solved that problem. So we've been very focused on making sure that this kind of Groyper Nazism that we see spreading across the country is simply not welcome in Florida, and I'm very proud that we did a good job of dealing with it.
And I appreciate the fact that you said that that you're not dealing with hate speech. Would you elaborate on the difference between racist speech, anti-Semitic speech, hate speech, and how you see the First Amendment protecting speech when it comes to this?
Well, I think in America, you're largely allowed to say whatever you want. If you want to say that you hate the Jews, you're allowed to do it. You're allowed to be an idiot in America. I mean, that's okay. But where it crosses the line is when it becomes violent. So here's a great example. I probably have 1,000 people a day who will write like, "I hope you die." All right, well, that's a pretty horrible thing to say, but you're allowed to say that in America. But I have had 3 people who say, "I'm coming to kill you." That you can't do. And those 3 people now sit in prison. That's the difference. They're both speech, but one is a threat of violence. The other one is people just being idiots. You're allowed to do that. You can say what you want. You can wave a sign saying what you want, but you can't graffiti that onto the side of a building. You can't throw that message onto someone's yard. You can't get in the way of someone trying to get into a synagogue. So one of the things that both the radical left and kind of the loser right will say is, they'll conflate speech and action. The fact that you can say whatever you want doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. And that's where I was able to draw the line. So again, if people want to stand on the sidewalk and wave signs saying, "I hate Jews," they're allowed to do that. That's America. But they're not allowed to cross into action. And that's where we draw the line.
Okay, and I think that's very important. And as you were describing the things that you were saying, this is where the line is. You did it better, I think, even than what I'm about to say. I'm just going to restate it a little bit different, but speech and action is a very clear way to explain it. It also, we have rights in America, and we want people to be able to exercise those rights freely. They're not allowed to exercise their rights and infringe on other people's exercise of their rights. So you have the right to speech, you have the right to religion, you have the right to own property. So when you're preventing someone from being able to go into a synagogue, that is preventing them from being able to exercise their right for religion. That's infringing on their rights. When you're doing something to their property, like their yard, you're now infringing on their rights there as well. So we protect rights, and you cannot allow the protection of the rights to override the rights of other individuals.
Yeah, and again, but the things you're describing are not speech. They're action. Right. Littering in someone's yard is not speech. That's an action. Standing in my way when I'm trying to enter the synagogue, that's not speech. That's action. So there are rules. And again, these wackos and losers, maybe because they're stupid, they don't understand the difference between speech and action. But I have never tried to get to deplatform. I've never tried to shut people up. You can say whatever you want, but when your speech crosses into action, that's where we draw the line. And again, even when it comes to dealing with anti-Semitism in our colleges and universities, I just said, however you deal with racism, however you deal with that, if you let the Ku Klux Klan burn crosses in the college green because you go free speech, well, then you can, let the free Palestine idiots do the same. But it turns out we've got 60 years of experience in this country limiting speech when it comes to certain preferential groups. I just said Jews need to be treated the same. That's all.
Okay. And I understand that. And you were doing this. When did you begin working on that kind of legislation?
Well, the funny thing is, when I got elected to the Florida legislature in 2016, I didn't run thinking I would work on Jewish issues. I ran for the reasons that all conservatives run, and I still worked on all of those things. But right after I got elected in 2016, there was a spate of bomb threats made at Jewish day schools around Florida. And the leading organizer of those Jewish day schools came to my office and they said, Randy, will you help get security money to protect Jewish day schools? And I told them no. I said, no, I won't. And they said, why? I said, I don't have a Jewish day school in my district. I don't have a Jewish day school in my county. So no, I'm not going to help you. Why me? And they looked at me and they said, because you're the only one who can. I said, what do you mean? And they said, you're the only Jewish Republican in the Florida legislature. So if you don't do it, nobody will. So I went and I did it, and it was really hard. I thought it would be easy, but it wasn't. It was a very hard thing to do. We got $641,000 in our first year to say that no matter where you go to school, whether it's a public school or a private Jewish school, you deserve to be safe. And when I left the legislature, that $641,000 had turned into $40 million a year. So we make sure in Florida that we don't mess around with these kinds of things. And it's sad that Jewish day schools need security. I hate that we spend $40 million on it. We should only have to spend zero. But the fact of the matter is you've got crazy people out there who will attack people for who they are, and we've got to keep these kids safe. Once I passed that, I realized this was part of my responsibility as someone in elected office to look out not only for my constituents that I represented in the legislature, but to look out for all Floridians, and that's why I worked on that. And obviously, I have that same burden now that I'm in Congress.
I have a couple of thoughts with what you just said. One, I've shared before with my audience, so some people who listen to the show may have heard this before. I was invited to watch the video after October 7th that the Israeli government put together. I think it's like a 55 or so minute video. It's
the worst thing you've ever seen.
It truly is. It truly is. It's a closed captioning video of the crimes and the evil and the onslaught the people in Israel faced on October 7th. The place where I watched that was at the Jewish Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And I went in there and I think I left my phone in my car because you weren't allowed to record it. They didn't want electronic equipment. So I just left it in my car and only brought my car keys and some paper and a pencil or pen with me. And I got into this room. I'd never been in the building before. There were police officers in the parking lot. There was security in the building. I'm pretty sure we had to go through a metal detector. And then we get into and the Israeli government was there. It was right after October 7th. So I'm sure some of that security was because of October 7th. But then when I get into the room and I noticed there were red fire alarm pulls on some of the walls. And there were also these blue buttons that were permanently mounted on the wall to push for security and to call police. I've never experienced that before. Now, in my church that I go to, and I've been to different churches around the country as I travel, there will be police officers outside of the church. There's security. Now, it's terrible that in America we have to have that, but I have seen that in churches. What we don't have in churches, though, is an emergency button to push on every wall. So if you're being attacked, you can quickly go push a button to try to get additional help. And I think that it's something that Christians in this country just haven't encountered the same way that Jewish people have.
Yeah, they will, unfortunately, given the kinds of people that do this to Jewish folks. I mean, we're just the first target. But yeah, no, look, every synagogue in America will have security at Friday night services and Saturday services. And to be clear, that security is not there to help people park. That security is there because there are threats. And it just happened. You know, a Muslim American in Michigan just last month attempted to drive his car in and kill 200 Jews at the largest Reform synagogue in the United States. And it was because, he believed in terrorism, and we had the mayor of Dearborn, I believe, put out a statement that attempted to justify it. So, Jews are under real serious threat today, and it gets worse every day as we continue to allow mainstream Islam to take root in our country. But whether it's mainstream Muslims or just old-fashioned neo-Nazis, it exists. It's a real thing. And look, I've been in Congress for a year. I have colleagues who've served here for 10, 20, 30 years. And I was in the legislature before that. There are 3 people in my 9.5 years in politics who have been arrested, charged, prosecuted, convicted, and are sitting in jail for making death threats. And to be clear, it's not like it wasn't like the 3 people worked together. There are 3 unique incidents where that's happened. Most of my colleagues have never had that happen at all, let alone have 3 of them. It's a real issue that people like me have to deal with.
Yeah, and it's absolutely horrible that you have to deal with it and that your family also has to deal with it, because if those threats are coming at you, it impacts them as well, and they don't want to see anything happen to their dad or their husband. Okay, let me I wanted to establish your background and make sure people understand you've been fighting for protecting Jewish people and also making sure that there is equality when it comes to discrimination, that the rules apply no matter what when it comes to discrimination. You're not going to protect one class of people and not the other. All classes of people deserve protection. And you've been doing that since long before the October 7th attacks in Israel a couple of years ago, and before you were in Congress. One of the things that is concerning me, and I maybe I should have noticed it, especially in light of how I was just talking about the buttons inside of the Atlanta Jewish Center. Maybe I should have noticed this before October 7th, and I did not. But I've seen so much online now since October 7th that are attacks towards Jewish people and towards Israel, and many of the attacks are conflating Israel and Jewish people, and they're using the word Israel to instead of using Jewish people, because they know that would sound so overtly anti-Semitic. And I understand you can have legitimate disagreements with what a government does, and that is, I have disagreements with what our own government does. So I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, but what I'm seeing online it's just alarming me. And we've seen this from Tucker Carlson, from Candace Owens, from other so-called conservative influencers. I don't even know that they really are conservative influencers. They're influencers who've talked a lot about some of the conservative values, but I don't know that I don't think they're really conservative in the way that I am. And then when you call them out, people get upset and they say, well, no, you shouldn't be calling them out. We all just need to kind of get along, and what they're doing is wrong. Yes, but we don't need to ratchet it up and make it worse. Maybe there's an argument for that. I can kind of understand why people would feel that way. And then I hear what you're saying has happened to schools. I think about the shooting that happened in Boulder, Colorado. I think about the attack that happened in Washington, D.C. with the 2 Jewish people who were just getting engaged and were just killed. I think about what you just said about how you've had to deal with 3 death threats, legitimate, valid death threats. We get hate stuff to us all the time. It's happened for so long, you just sort of become numb to it. But when it is a legitimate threat that requires the police to intervene and for someone to go to jail or to prison, that's next level that most people never have to experience. And I think that this behavior online and this creeping acceptance, or just sort of maybe it's not acceptance, but it's just sort of like, well, we don't want to rock the boat. So we don't want to say anything to upset people who are saying the bad anti-Semitic things. We just kind of don't want to rock the boat and we'll remain neutral. I think that if we don't stand up and say this is wrong and we are not okay with this, and I'm not, they have the constitutional right to say whatever they want, as you mentioned before. But we also have a moral obligation to stand up and say, sure, you can say all that, but you're an idiot and you're wrong. And morally, I'm opposed to it. And I think if we're not willing to do that, the kind of things you're experiencing and other Jewish people have experienced will continue to increase in the country. And as you just said, attacks will also happen on others, such as Christians.
Yeah, look, I think here's why it matters. It matters far beyond Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is a moral rot and a cancer in society. And fundamentally, where it comes from is this. When people are unhappy about their own lives and they want someone to blame, oftentimes they pick the Jews. There aren't that many of us. We've done as a culture very well because Jews don't sit around generally and feel sorry for themselves. They go and they work hard and they fight hard. And so you've got people, look at a guy like Tucker Carlson, right? Here's a guy who was at the top of his game, the most powerful broadcaster in the United States, gets humiliated and gets fired from Fox, and becomes a podcaster. Well, so his life has not turned out how he wanted it to be. So he looks for someone to blame. Well, I'm going to blame the Jews. And so there's this group of sort of losers out there who have these sort of miserable existences. And they don't want to say it's because they're losers. They want someone else to blame. If I eat too much, I say it's McDonald's fault, not my own. That's what they want to do. And the problem is this becomes a societal rot. It starts with the Jews. It doesn't end with the Jews. And every culture that has embraced anti-Semitism has ultimately found that the gateway philosophy to other things and ultimately has collapsed. And by the way, look at the Democratic Party. They've embraced anti-Semitism. And now they've embraced all of these other horrible things, which basically they've become an anti-American party. So if we allow this to take root, it's not just what it will do to American Jews, it's what it will do to the United States as well. It will eat us alive. And the reason we have to stand up to it is this. I was never a Democrat, ever. But when I went to college more than 30 years ago, I always thought liberals were stupid, but I never thought they were anti-Semitic. And what happened is they had a couple people show up and act like loudmouths. And you know what the Democrats said? They said, they're the fringe. Don't listen to them. They don't matter. We can ignore them. And now look where they are today, where anti-Semitism is core to the Democratic Party, where Alan Dershowitz, a lifelong liberal Democrat, just announced yesterday he's going to become a Republican because the Democratic Party has become so anti-Semitic. They're going to try to do that to us. And if we don't stand up now and smush it, if we don't kill it in the cradle, it will take root here as well. And if we lose the Democratic Party and we lose the Republican Party, we will lose America. This is about Judeo-Christian values. This is about Western civilization. And that is what is at risk here today. This is about a lot more than the Jews. This is about what it means to be American and America as a whole.
That is exactly right. I can't see it any better than you just did. Let me shift gears just slightly. You're running for re-election, of course. Well, thankfully, you're running for re-election. Every member of the House either has to run for re-election or they don't go back every 2 years. But you've got an opponent in the Republican primary who is a real. Tell the viewers about him.
Well, I don't know much about the guy. I hadn't heard of him until about 3 weeks ago. He's a foreigner from Armenia, who's also American, apparently, a triple citizen, not just a citizen of the United States, but a citizen of 2 other countries. So he's a foreigner. Tried to make it in the United States Navy. They kicked him out. They wouldn't let him actually serve it. We've heard it's something to do with he's very, very little, so maybe he wasn't tall enough to serve. But he's a vehement anti-Semite. And unlike many of these people who say, I love the Jews, I just hate Israel, this guy's quite open about it. He's like, no, I don't like Jews. And actually Israel just put out a list of the top 10 most dangerous anti-Semites in the world. And to my amazement, a guy I'd never even heard of until about 3 weeks ago was ranked number one. He's got a very large social media following, not from Florida. He lives in Las Vegas when he's not in his foreign country of Armenia. But he's just a terrible anti-Semite. I think what he's trying to show is that this group of hate-filled lunatics and losers can take hold in the Republican Party. But look, my constituents are smart. The little Armenians said, I think that President Trump was a pedophile rapist who should be impeached. That's not a winning argument. And it may work in Armenia where he's from, but that's not an argument that's going to work in the United States. So it's bad. We have to take it seriously because we don't want this to take root in our party. We don't want Armenians to be able to serve in Congress, but I'm not going to lose too much sleep about it.
Okay, that's good. And he's a piece of work. I listened to a couple of his interviews as I was preparing for this with you, and it's a little bit breathtaking how anti-Semitic he is. It's just at least the thing about it, when people show their true colors like that, at least you see what it looks like. Yeah. And you can be much more aware when they're that forthright about their anti-Semitism. At least it makes it very clear for people this is what it looks like. I think where some people on the Republican side of the aisle right now have trouble is that it's people who they've listened to for years or watched for years, and it's hard to understand that now what's coming out of those same people's mouths are things we can't be okay with. Well, and we have to.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson is the best example of this. My father was someone who, if I was talking to him on the phone and Tucker's show came on, he would, on Fox, my dad would say, Randy, I have to go. Tucker's coming on. I mean, he was a beloved figure in my family. And I actually called him about 6 months ago the most dangerous anti-Semite in America. And the reason for that is he was trading on this reputation he created over 20 years to propagate this insane nonsense that he spouted off. I don't know if it's too many nicotine patches or what's going on, but the guy's clearly had some sort of psychotic break. And that's what happens when people that we used to respect have sort of embraced this. I think they do it for a few reasons. I think one is they're unhappy with how their lives have turned out. You go from the top of the Fox News pile to having, to basically hiding in your house, which is what he's doing. And so he's not happy with how his life's turned out. I think the second thing is there is an audience in this sort of loser group. They don't work. They don't have girlfriends. I mean, they just sort of sit around their houses like losers. And I guess they're looking for people to talk to them. So there's a market for that. And I think we've also conflated foreign influence with Americans. I mean, I often see on my posts all of these people who pretend to be Americans, but they're from Pakistan or Nigeria or somewhere else. And I think these guys have huge followings in foreign countries. And, there are over 1 billion Muslims in the world, a large percentage of whom hate Israel, hate the West, support terrorism, and they've become a market for these guys. But I think it is important for us to speak loud and openly about it and to point out the good news for Tucker is he's not as dangerous today as he was 6 months ago, because now it has crept into the consciousness that there's actually something wrong with the guy. And you've seen President Trump do that. And I'm so grateful President Trump is our leader, because he is doing what the Democrats should have done 30 years ago. The Democrats chose to become anti-Semitic because they didn't take the threat seriously. And President Trump is taking it seriously.
And thank goodness President Trump is taking it seriously. And I think also President Trump, I don't know. I I'm not on his speed dial, so I don't know him personally. I've met him, but I don't know him personally. And I would suspect that the President of the United States of America, the leader of the free world, the commander-in-chief in America, really doesn't have time to have to get into it with a bunch of stuff that's happening on social media like that and be the referee. And yet sometimes a leader has to get him, just say, call the balls and strikes. And that's what I think he is doing right now. And sometimes that is what it takes. It's not getting down in the muck. It's just saying, this is not what we need to be doing. We need to be looking over here instead. And it takes a leader to be able to do that. The Democrat Party did not do that, as you said, 30 years ago. They didn't do it two years ago when Israel was being attacked. And instead, they allowed the very anti-Semitic actions and speech to happen within their own party. And of course, everyone can say whatever they want, but they weren't calling it out. And now it is just rampant in the Democratic Party.
Rampant. It's unbelievable. I mean, their star of the day, a guy named Hassan Piker, a paperwork American whose parents came to America to have him as a baby, took him back to Turkey where he was raised, marinating in mainstream Islam terror, has come to America and said the most horrible things, yet they celebrate him. Look, the Democratic Party is lost. It is lost. And if we lose the Republican Party, we lose America. And I'm not saying American Jews lose America. I'm saying America loses America. Because I serve in Congress with people who I know hate the country in which they serve. It is a real threat. And if I've learned anything over this year that I've been here, I am much more pessimistic about the future of the country a year in than I was a year ago, because I see how determined some people are to destroy it. It's very, very upsetting. And I think people need to be worried because there's a lot at risk right now.
And there absolutely is. Okay, I have a couple of other questions, and then I know that we have to end at your time. You've got other things you have to get onto this day. What do you think is radicalizing so many people right now in America towards this trend? And I understand you were talking about how they're losers and they're disappointed with things in their lives. Do you think social media is influencing this as well? What are the things that you see as a problem?
So I think a lot of this does come from social media, and I think it comes from two areas. First, you do have the sort of anti-Semitic group out there. Again, there's over 1 billion Muslims. Mainstream Islam is highly, highly anti-Semitic. It's also highly anti-Christian. They just target Jews because there aren't that many of us. You know, there's a famous saying in mainstream Islam: today we come for the Saturday people, tomorrow we come for the Sunday people. You know, we celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday. I'll let you figure out who celebrates it on Sunday. So we're just the first target. But second, many of our foreign adversaries have realized that anti-Semitism can be a way to rip societies apart. So a lot of this is funded by, say, China or Russia. They don't actually care about anti-Semitism. They don't actually hate Jews. In fact, they don't like the people who hate the Jews, but they like the idea of creating societal discord in order to tear the country apart from within. And to some degree, they are succeeding in doing that. The level of political divide is much greater. And again, a lot of that is being funded by foreigners. The foreign interference in the United States is spectacular right now, coming from Iran, Qatar, Russia, China. They're the big four, and that's why we need to be on guard against it.
Absolutely. And I think that it is very hidden. It is very hidden on social media. So you can see someone who posts something and they'll get a lot of likes or a lot of reposts for it. It seems like it's very popular, but you have no earthly idea whether those likes and reposts are coming from America or they're coming from overseas. I also think that is, just as a sidebar, an issue that members of Congress should be paying attention to. When they go and post something online, your constituents are in your district, and your job is to represent America. It's great to be able to use social media to help get a message out. You also have to be wise enough to understand that you could be getting likes and reposts from foreign governments who are doing it for very nefarious reasons.
30% of the comments, at least on my social media posts, are not from Americans, and you can look that up on X. 30%, and I'm not sure why Pakistanis are so interested in what I have to say. But, and by the way, when I say 30% are foreign, I represent 1/435th of the country. There are 435 congressmen, so less than 1/4 of 1% of Americans are my constituents. Yet, again, I'm getting comments from all over the country. Look, if I could tell Elon Musk how to change X, at minimum, I wish we could say, I only want my stuff to be seen in the United States. I don't want it to be seen in other countries. I don't want people from other countries to be able to post. And I also wish I could say, if they're looking at my stuff on a VPN, they're considered a foreign country. I think if they did that, that would clean up so much of this.
Yeah, I think that those are good recommendations. Okay, the last thing, well, I guess I have two other questions. What is the one thing that you think Americans still don't understand about anti-Semitism that we haven't discussed already today?
Well, I think the biggest thing people don't understand is how small Jews are in this country. We're 2% of the country. And I don't think they understand why Jews do as well as we do. We generally overperform in all aspects of American life. It's because Jews don't sit around waiting for the government to bail us out. I mean, we believe in education. We believe in hard work. I dealt with a lot of anti-Semitism when I was a kid, but my parents always said, you don't let that be an excuse. You don't go to the government and you don't say, give me money or give me this or give me that. You go up and you dust yourself off. The other thing I would say is the number of contributions that American Jews have made to American life are extraordinary. You know, most of the famous Christmas songs that you know of were written by Jews. Many of the things in our popular life, and we just want to be part of America. You know, I've never been a dual citizen. I never went to Israel until I was in my 30s, and I think that we aren't the problem. We're an easy scapegoat. But we aren't the problem. We do have real problems in this country, but you have to focus on what those actually are, not some made up boogeyman.
Okay, my last question for you is, what would you want people who are watching this right now, what action would you want them to take? I like to make sure people have an action, not just, we don't get them riled up without telling them, here's something you can do about it.
Well, I would tell them to stop listening to, we'll call them the losers that are out there. It's time to turn off Tucker Carlson. He's clearly a mentally ill individual. It's time to turn off Megyn Kelly, who's just descended into some sort of rage. She's just this angry person. Candace Owens is crazy. It's time to, she's nuts. It's time to stop listening to these people. And it's time to recognize that if we don't treat anti-Semitism and these people the way that they deserve to be treated, it will destroy our movement from within. It is a cancer. It starts with the Jews. It doesn't end with the Jews. And that's what people need to understand. When you fight anti-Semitism, you're fighting for the Judeo-American values that made America great. And the people who are trying to destroy the Jews, what they really want to do is they want to destroy America. This is not a fight. You shouldn't, if you're not Jewish, you should care about this not because of the Jews. You should care about it because of yourselves, because it will come for you next. Ask the Christians in Nigeria. Ask the Christians in Syria. Ask them how it's worked out. They will come for you next. And that's why it matters to everybody.
Congressman Randy Fine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It really helps us reach more people who care about liberty and the Constitution. You can find this and other episodes at jennybethshow.com, as well as Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Instagram, X, and your favorite podcast platform.
The Jenny Beth Show is hosted by Jenny Beth Martin. The Jenny Beth Show is a production of Tea Party Patriots Action. For more information, Visit TeaPartyPatriots.org.